Thanks, Jeff. Ernesto, the common thread heard from protesters at college campuses across the country is this idea of divestment. So what are UNM's investments in the state of Israel, and what would divestment look like?
Okay, well, this is a fairly difficult question to answer. We know that UNM has a significant endowment pool that's managed by the UNM Foundation. And the
You're saying millions of dollars in this, right?
Yeah, hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay. I believe the UNM's last financial audit reported having 700 of their consolidated investment pool consisting of about $715 million.
And this is all in research you've had to do independently, is that correct?
Yes, I mean, some of this information is readily available on their web pages through their financial audits. The UNM Foundation reports a kind of high-level information about its investments in a series of funds based on asset categories and things of that type. So we've submitted a series of public record requests to try to gather some additional information, but are really running into a bit of a wall.
So do we have an actual figure as to how much UNM is investing in the state of Israel?
No, we don't. But we have begun to gather some sense of maybe what some of its financial connections are to Israeli companies primarily. So some of the funds that UNM is invested in make publicly available their holdings. So for example, UNM is invested in BlackRock, one of BlackRock's index funds. And we know from its investments in BlackRock that it has connections to companies that produce military weapons that are used and that are being used in the assault on Gaza and in sustaining the illegal occupation in Palestine.
Okay, and that's directly related to what divestment would look like if UNM were to approach this. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's some good resources out there that would help guide us in informing, what divestment would look like from which companies. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, for example, has identified 112 businesses, mostly Israeli companies, which profit off of the illegal occupation. As a starting place, we could consult a list of that kind. Of course, there's other divestment lists that look at U.S. involvement as well, weapons manufacturers primarily.
Got it. And Ernesto, it's very fascinating to know that just the audit itself, understanding what that number is part of what the group that is create the encampment at UNM is looking for. And that's one of the things you're asking the Board of Regents to begin, correct? Is that audit process?
Well, no, I think what we're asking the Board of Regents to do is to go along this journey with us. We're asking for a degree of transparency, which is currently not available about their investments.
Okay. Paloma, I have to ask now. Now let's go to the encampments a little bit and the protest. You were one of the first journalists in New Mexico to see the encampment at UNM get established. And when the Lobo did first notice this, what was UNMPD's involvement when you first started this coverage?
Well, during the day, like in the early part of the afternoon, there was no police involvement when they first started pitching the tents.
And this is on day one, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a Monday.
A Monday.
And it started out with a march and rally, starting from the sub to the bookstore and then to the duck pond. And then at the duck pond is when people started bringing out tents and pitching them. And there was no police presence at that time until at 6 p.m. then they put the first notice on the tent that this was a violation of UNM policy. And then at 8 p.m. when there was a rally that happened that evening because it was also Earth Day, the police did come, and it was UNM and state police officers that came to the encampment and brought up policy again. They tried to make the protesters remove the tents that were there, but they picked up the tents and picketed with them. And the officers pretty much just stood there until late at night and they didn't really do much except for stand there. And I talked to one of the UNMPD officers to try to get a statement from them, and I didn't get one.
When did you first notice New Mexico State Police show up on campus around the encampment?
It was 7:51.
Oh, that night, the first night New Mexico State Police were there.
Yeah.
Okay, and so later that night, your reporting showed that police did interact with the protesters and clear out the encampment. Later into that, we saw some of that similar pattern throughout the week. Now, I'm curious, because the duck pond is right in the middle of campus, which means everybody sees the encampment. So what have you noticed as a reporter as well as a UNM student in terms of the way that the folks on campus are interacting with the protest and encampment?
Yeah, I think I haven't really noticed much of except for one day there was a counter protester who came with signs and stuff, but otherwise I haven't noticed much interaction as far as people opposing it. I haven't been there 24/7, so I'm not sure, but from what I can tell, those who are engaged in the encampment are there, and those who aren't kind of just walk by from my observation.
Okay, and of course you can't be 24/7 because you're also a student who has finals this week. And
Yeah.
we could talk more about what that's been like to cover all of this with finals going on a little bit later. But Ahmad, I want to ask you, so legally speaking, what rights do students have to protest the way they have at the duck pond?
You know, every university campus, fundamentals of freedom of expression and speech are vital to this dialogue, to learning and sharing knowledge. And it is incumbent upon every university to have that type of environment for students to be able to express, and rather than forcibly silence these folks, more dialogue and more speech is encouraged with a wide variety of views. So the students have every right to protest within the confines of their First Amendment rights, and as long as there isn't an impediment to the operation of the university, or there isn't physical threats that are occurring, they have every right to pursue their ability to express what is cherished and what is protected in our Constitution.
Okay, and a week after the encampment was set up, we saw this escalate to the situation at the Student Union building. You know, there's images around us that show a lot of what Paloma and her sister and their Daily Lobo colleague caught. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what's different from a legal perspective once the group decides to occupy the Student Union building?
I think there is a distinction with regards to administrative policies versus criminal acts, and so from a very general statement I'd like to start with is that the fostering of the environment really is a responsibility of the university. And I love what Ernesto said earlier about wanting that university to go on that journey that he spoke about, because it's always supposed to be about the faculty, the administration, and the students as one. When we start going at separating students away from faculty and administration is where the problems start. So I fault the university for not having historically better relationships, understanding student organizations, fostering an environment for more dialogue, for an opportunity to have speech. But with regards to specific instances in terms of the difference between being an encampment and occupying the sub, there may be a distinction, and that's going to be drawn by the facts. And here's ultimately where it comes down to, is whether in fact this rose to the level of something that is contrary to the policies, and whether they were acting within their rights peacefully to protest and allow for the students' freedom of expression. That's going to be dictated by case-by-case basis, quite frankly.
And what about the general views of the act of civil disobedience? You know, Paloma and I was also there with Paloma and covering that night at the Student Union building. We were there, you know, well into the next morning, and there was a general conversation around everybody that this was an act of civil disobedience. You may have to expect to get arrested. There was preparation around all of that. With all that stated as fact too, is there any element regarding free speech when it comes to civil disobedience on campus?
I think that it's also contextual in the sense that you do have a right, understanding the responsibilities and the consequences it may have. Several students have expressed the idea that even if we are arrested, it's nothing compared to what what the Palestinians in Gaza have been going through, and the deaths and the genocide that is occurring. So there is a sense of consequence that has been recognized by students. But I also think that there is opportunities for the university to foster some de-escalation on their part. There is a responsibility to ensure that we don't go and call in state police and have a forceful uprooting of students that occupy the student union building. I really do feel that was over the top with regards to the reactions by the university. And this is, again, an academic setting to where freedom of speech is primarily what universities must foster and are known to foster. This is an exchange of an academic environment where civil disobedience is part of a conversation that occurs. And this world has many issues that are concerning to this generation and these students, and they are finding ways to express it. So I think within the context of their responsibilities, as long as there isn't an outright impediment to the operation of the university, as long as there isn't this notion of physical threats to other students, they are to be protected. And we talk about this notion of protection, right? Hand in hand with the ability to have speech be protected and threats to be protected. These threats and safety of others need to be protected, the counter, if you will, the counter opinions. But protections are also afforded to people that want to express their political opinions about what's going on in the world as here. And I think the university needs to recognize that those students need to be protected.
All right, thank you for that. And Ernesto, I want to come back to you and wrap up this segment here. Something that was just stated here, and something we heard consistently from people at the camp and inside the protest is, yes, the situation that we're responding to is nothing compared to the genocide that people in Gaza are facing and the daily attacks. Now, I'm curious about the idea of civil disobedience and the tactic used to make that a priority that night, but in recovery since then, with that action now done, can you discuss sort of what that shifted in the mood and in terms of like how discussions for tactics happen in the encampment for stuff going forward? Because I imagine this is not going to stop anytime soon and will likely go into next school year, excuse me.
Yeah, I would anticipate that the encampment continue to work to bring pressure on the university to address some of our demands. I think it's important to remember and always center what's happening in Palestine. There's a genocide underway that has mobilized students who have deep concerns and who feel that they have a moral obligation to stand up and speak out against what's happening. And so I anticipate that the demands to disclose our financial relationships to Israeli companies as well as U.S. companies that are sustaining and profiting off of the assault on Gaza and the illegal occupation to continue. Divestment is a key tactic to express our moral outrage about what's happening right now.
Thank you. Ahmad, real quickly here to wrap up, can you please discuss what legal role you may have in helping the people who were arrested at the sub?
Thank you. Full disclosure,
yes.
I've committed myself and my office associates to representing pro bono any of the protesters. We have not yet concretely entered an appearance on any of them. I anticipate that probably will happen.
Okay, and then have you had any, what conversations will you offer for them in terms of review of any of the case? What can you offer for people who contact you?
We'll offer them the fullest defense that is possible. We are firmly in belief that there isn't a Palestine exception to the First Amendment and your right to speech and freedom of expression. We will afford them a vigorous defense in this regard. I anticipate arraignments are coming up for these students.
Next week, yeah.
That's
right. All right, I have to interrupt you there. That's all the time that we have for now, but we'll be right back here at the table toward the end of the show to dig a little bit deeper.